Hi, welcome to a review of the town warrant. This is Voter Information Chair Chris Joyce, and we're hosting today a review of some of the warrant articles, in addition to a briefing on the logistics of how to get to the meeting, what to expect when you get there. We'll do that toward the end. But we really want to talk about what's different this year, everything. And to that end, we have Joe Powers, interim town administrator, Carol Capola, finance director, and off-site, but with us anyway, Dana DaCosta, finance committee chair. So we're going to start out with Joe, I think talking about what's different and a little bit of the history of how we got to the budget and the warrant articles.
Well, first, thank you for doing this and setting this up. I think, this is obviously my first town meeting in the role as interim town administrator, and only my second town meeting as a voter and resident of the town of Harwich. I never had the opportunity where I worked before to attend town meetings, so this is several firsts for me. But I know going through this exercise today gives the voters a sense of normalcy, which, as you alluded to in the opening, we really haven't had. And to bring everyone up to speed, it really is the tale of two town meetings, if you will. And I know the two individuals that are joining me today, Carol Capola, our finance director, and Dana DaCosta, the finance committee chair, can attest to it as well. But way back before the state of emergency on Saturday, March 7th, we all participated in this very room in really one of the last big gatherings, if you will, as we now refer to them in COVID-19 terms, and went through the budget process then. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up, because the effort that Carol and Dana on the Finance Committee, as well as all the department heads, the Board of Selectmen, and everybody put into that, because at that time we were dealing with a budget deficit of $1.8 million, which in and of itself really was going to be the big story of town meeting for calendar year 2020. Obviously, all of that was eclipsed by the pandemic and now operating as we do more remotely than in person. But the efforts that everyone put into that really laid the groundwork once we knew that we could have a town meeting, that we knew it was not going to be any way that we ever had it before. You know, when people ask me what's different about this, I say, well, the difference for our spring annual town meeting indoors at the community center is that it's going to be held in the fall outdoors on a Saturday morning on a football field. Other than that, everything's the same.
Right.
But the efforts that Carol and the team and everyone put in back on March 7th laid the groundwork to really, I don't want to be over dramatic, but I would say to survive what the pandemic threw at us from a budget standpoint. And it gave us the confidence, or it gave me the confidence for sure, that with the additional deficit that we were dealing with, we would be able to meet that. So what we have is a balanced budget as required, but I would say it's a budget probably unlike any other, which is matching a town meeting that will be unlike any other. And I do suggest that we may be voting and doing things at this town meeting that we may have never done before. And I would say, as the good Lord is willing, we may never do again. And, you'll see that as we get into not only the operating budget, but the new Article 4 this year is an article directly related to using stabilization fund. And I wasn't sure if you wanted to get into that discussion first, but again, I would recap by saying first, thank you, because doing this gives us a sense of normalcy. It will give me an opportunity to get into the logistics of this and then get into the normal conversation.
I would suggest maybe we just talk about the approach for this budget and how that stabilization and free cash are maybe part of that.
Sure.
Am I okay with that?
I think that's fine. And Carol, would you want to talk about the severe impact that we had seen through pandemic on revenue and all of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
You want me to go ahead and start?
Sure, I think it's a great place to start.
So I'd like to just back up a little bit and talk more about what happened since March. We were not able to have a town meeting before the end of June, and that came with it some ramifications. So the town was required to prepare what they called 1/12 budgets. Those budgets were prepared based on fiscal year '20 budget, and then were submitted to the Board of Selectmen and approved on a month-by-month basis. They were then sent to the Department of Revenue for their review and approval, and then adopted in our accounting system on a monthly basis as well. Those budgets were required to be 1/12, no more than 1/12 of the fiscal year '20 budget, and we analyzed, the Finance Department analyzed fiscal year spending on a month-by-month basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, to determine what was appropriate and necessary to fund the months of July, August, and September of fiscal year '21. Once that was completed, we went back to the drawing table, and we had been working on revenues since the beginning of April, or what our estimated revenues were going to be to complete the fiscal year '20, and then to move on to fiscal year '21, and even to estimate early estimations of what fiscal year '22 would look like. And so we looked at impacts of rooms and meals, excise taxes, short-term rental taxes, your restaurant or the meals tax that's associated with all of the restaurants that, as you are aware, went to close down, then finally were able to reopen to takeout only, and then interior to a 50% capacity, which has made it very difficult for those businesses. The hospitality industry has been impacted during the typically the busiest months, and the areas where these businesses rely on folks coming to Cape Cod to visit and explore and enjoy some time of relaxation. And due to unemployment rates at predominantly higher than they have been in a significant number of years, we also had to reduce our revenue stream for FY '21 with regard to motor vehicle excise tax, because there's a lot of folks out there that are in difficult financial times that aren't able to purchase a new vehicle, or even a used vehicle for that matter. Those are some of the areas that are significantly impacted in FY '21 of our estimated revenues. In addition to that, we saw golf revenues, while they were strong, they were not at the strength that they were in fiscal year of '19. We estimate the same kind of a reduction or potential reduction in fiscal year '21. In addition to that, we saw summer programs for recreation that were not able to occur. And so we have adjusted our revenues for FY '21 with regard to that as well. Since the economic kind of downturn, we saw interest rates for funds that the town invests in the market have dropped. Some of them have regained some growth, but not to the fullest extent. And so we have reduced our revenues with regard to investment revenue as well, that we expect to anticipate for fiscal year '21. We went back to all of the departments, and we asked them to take a very close look at their budget, closer than that, scraping to the bones in some of these departments. They'll have significant impacts for some of the departments with reductions that they brought forward. I don't anticipate that the level of service that residents and property taxpayers and visitors to Harwich will be impacted significantly, but we really did scrape down to the bare bones in all of the departments in order to bring the town of Harwich and the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee a balanced budget using some funds that the town has banked away in stabilization funds for those kind of rainy days. And so we brought forward a recommendation to use $574,000 in stabilization funds. Right now, or as of the end of June, stabilization fund had a balance of $4.5 million. So moving forward, we would anticipate that we would be able to certainly bounce back from these challenging times and be able to replace those funds in the very near future.
Great. Do we want to talk a little bit about the use of free cash? Am I bouncing around too much?
Well, no, I don't think you're bouncing around too much. I think it's a perfect time, though, if you want to bring in our Finance Committee Chairman.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, typically Article 4 is the operating budget.
Right?
For this town meeting, Article 4 is a completely different article than we've seen before, and it gets to the use of stabilization fund. As Carol's talked about, we're dipping into it, and I will argue that it is a rainy day fund, and I can't imagine a rainier day than what we're going through right now.
And Joe, we're asking the voters on the 26th to agree to these, taking the funds from stabilization. The budget.
Correct, that's what the intent of Article 4 is, and if that passes, then we would, move on. But Article 4, I know I'm not speaking out of turn when I say it was written. The author of it, who joins us from the woods, and can speak about that much more in-depth than I could, and wrote really a compelling, and because it's a very accurate explanation in the warrant, and it's just a compilation of all the things we've endured that bring us to this point. Dana, was that a good enough setup for you? Oh, I hope he's still there.
Dana?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you, Joe. For the Finance Committee, hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
All right. I'll just say that for the Finance Committee, one of the first things we did was lay over the calendar of events. Usually administration has a real good calendar when there's a May town meeting. Adjusting all of that to a September town meeting really brought up some milestones that we had to hit, and knowing that the Finance Committee has to have most of their votes prior to the warrant going to print to best inform the public, we wanted to make sure, especially in this downturned economy, that we had all the tools available. So making sure that there was an article included by the selectmen, it's their warrant. The Finance Committee knew this. But we wanted to make sure that that tool of being able to actually access the stabilization fund was in the warrant. Once the warrant closes, it can't be injected afterwards. So I know that we developed it and brought it forward just to press the idea that it should be included. This article will take a 2/3 vote for a town meeting to approve. And we're hoping, as Joe said, that this is a year where you would consider your rainy day fund. I think if everybody were to read the explanation that goes with Article 4, they would see some of the forces that have affected the town financially and emotionally and health-wise that have hit this town. And I think in reality, you have to go back a long ways to see a situation where this many things have bared upon the town in 1 year. And so the Finance Committee's push was just to make sure that this tool was available to use. And it turns out that we're going to need some funds from it. And we were very concerned about making sure we left plenty of funds for next year, because we don't know what next year is going to bring. But we did bring forward the use of $575,000 approximately dollars that we'll be asking town meeting to approve to balance budget.
Great, thank you very much, Dana. Yep. Do we want to talk about the operating budget now?
Sure, absolutely, and thank you for that. And I think, if the voters are following along, it's page 10 of the warrant, and you can see, as in years past, we have the table of available funds, but this year, I think it's fair to say that there's a greater reliance on the operating budget as regards to free cash, and certainly, as we've just talked about, the use of stabilization, which is very rare, if ever, an occurrence. And so if I get the numbers correctly, at the time that we were presenting this budget and going through it, we had roughly $1.44 million in free cash, and I believe we've used the full amount of free cash. Now, you'll see that impacting upon the operating budget, and you'll see it coming up under the capital articles as well. And as we talk about operating, I do want to juxtapose quickly with the capital to say that even the capital plan was not spared. More projects were deferred, I think it's fair to say, to fiscal year '22 and beyond than what I'm presenting for fiscal year '21. And the vast majority of what we're presenting for fiscal year '21 is supported by free cash. But as we've said, it is a balanced budget. It is a budget that provides the programs and services that the residents, taxpayers, and voters of our town have come to expect, but at extreme effort and with a significant level of difficulty to get there. I wouldn't want anyone going into town meeting to think that anything that we've gone through or any efforts that we've done have been easy. Perhaps if it looks that way, that's a tribute to my colleagues and I to make it look easy, but as Carol had said before, the department heads went through everything. We looked at past year's articles to bring to bear on this. We deferred many capital projects, so we have a balanced operating budget that represents the required programs and services for the town. I would say that mercifully, as Carol alluded to, you know, in government, we're not immune or unaware of what the community is going through, and unemployment is a critical issue. I say that mercifully, we haven't had the impact upon jobs in this budget at this time. And, you know, I think there is some level of fortune as well. You know, we saw that when people retreated in the pandemic to their nests, who knew their nests were here in Harwich, but they came and they renovated, and we saw revenue and impact on that, and they came and they golfed, and they paid their property taxes, and but for that, I think we would have a much more difficult story. But I think for the operating budget, the key point is it's funded, it's balanced. It is, I believe I'm correct, Carol, in saying that it's less than what we had the year before,
I think it's 400,000 less than last year,
which, yeah,
but probably using other funds to, forget it, I didn't make
well,
sense.
no,
Yeah.
I think it's a good point. What I'm trying to say is that, you know, we had a deficit that we had to deal with.
Yeah.
Before pandemic, we had a deficit because of pandemic, and, you know, it's not a bloated budget by any way, and it's, I think it's as low as you can get and still carry forward the government. That's my personal opinion.
Should we move to the capital budget, or, yeah?
Well, I'm sure your audience, and I think you may have questions. You can see under Article 6, the Monomoy Regional School District
Right.
budget. At this point, there is no recommendation yet from the Board of Selectmen. The first thing I would say about that is that's because this whole process has been a work in progress every step of the way. You know, I'm going to sound like a broken record for those people that know what a record is. This process has been unlike any other we've gone through. And so, and you're doing this while with an interim town administrator. And so, as we went through the summer and we did this, we worked, as Dana said, right up to the last moment before we had our charter obligation of going to print. The school district, the Monomoy Regional School District, Carol and I are going to speak with our counterparts, Superintendent Carpenter and the new business manager, Michael McMillan, later in this week. And the school district committee and the selectmen are meeting jointly Monday evening, and I'm confident that we will finalize what we need to so that there are recommendations from finance committee, selectmen, and that the school committee and superintendent can speak to.
And we'll see that on the floor at the town meeting. We'll see.
Correct. Yep, and I'll speak later on about some of the handouts that we're adding because we're not going to be able to project things because of the sunlight. But that budget is certainly a work in progress, but it will be completed before we get to town meeting.
And the next big item, but much less than prior years, is Cape Cod Regional Technical High School.
Yes, yep.
Yep. I see that it's about what was it? $600,000 less than last year, so that must help us. A little sadness there that not as many Harwich students are going, however.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
you know, and that was information that was helpful for us back in February and March when we had the initial budget meeting. And I know I met with Superintendent Sanborn, Superintendent Sanborn the other day on a different matter, but know that the struggles that they've had as well, bringing school back into play under pandemic restrictions and all of that. So we were fortunate that they had the assessment offset, but again, what that means is we have less of our students going there at the present time.
Right.
Nonetheless, it was a help to the budget process.
Great. I would want to go back just briefly to Monomoy Regional High School. They also have another Article 15, and it's using the PEG funds, public
Public education,
know, Ed.
public access and education grant?
and something else.
We're looking over to
Yeah.
Jamie to see if we got
Yeah.
that right. Is that
PEG stands for Public Government.
public
yeah.
education government?
So out of the fees.
off the mark.
Yeah, I know. So out of our Comcast fees, this will be funded. And it really isn't affecting our budget, if I have that right, correct?
I
And
bel-
this one is 50% from Harwich, 50% from Chatham, so we split it.
Thank you.
But it's funds from our fees we pay to Comcast.
Correct, the
Right.
grant
Yeah.
money, exactly. And I'll say for the viewers that may not have heard from the voice from off camera, our dedicated Channel 18 director has just indicated, correct, on that one, it's a request of the Monomoy School District, so it's 50-50 between the two towns, and we're drawing upon the PEG.
Right, so it's not
grant money.
affecting the taxpayer.
Right. And my understanding is the school system's looking for this to upgrade their system.
Yeah,
You'll see that we've got appropriate articles in there to help Jamie and her team to upgrade their systems as well.
right. So just for the viewer, Channel 18's articles are 19 and 20, and similarly, that funding is coming from your Comcast fees and not part of the budget, the town budget. Yep. Want to talk a little bit about DPW? They've got 3 articles in, the scale decking, catch basin cleaner, and road maintenance, 12, 16, and 17. Road maintenance, I think, stands out because it's half of what we saw budgeted for last year.
Correct.
I don't think there's anything that jumps out about any of those, from my perspective, but I like the voter to know they're coming. That's 12, 16, and 17 on the articles. Anything we really want to say?
Well, I would say for Article
Facility.
12, this is a prime example of the efforts of Link Cooper, in this particular instance as department head, struggling with, but offering deferments for future years. Not that it's done easily, but as you can see in the article, really, all we're dealing with that one, the facility maintenance,
Right,
what we're doing is we're holding off on roof repairs for the Brooks Library as well as the building on 5 Bell's Neck in West Harwich. Typically, this article was used for the Cultural Center subsidy, and I'll speak to that later on in our discussion on revolving funds. So really what this gets to is, if I'm remembering it correctly, is really the repair, the much-needed repair of the DPW's transfer station, the scale decking system, which, quite frankly, if we don't do it now, we're in grave danger of losing that scale. But I think the article, the story of that article really is the deferments rather than what we're asking
right.
for. And again, that one is funded through our free cash.
Right, and that's, I say, only $55,000.
Sure,
So, yeah, okay.
And then, very similar, Article 16, the only vehicle we're really looking to do is the catch basin cleaner, which, if we're going to keep our streets clean and in the state that we want them, we need that vehicle because it's on its last legs. The Highway Department did, however, defer on a dump truck and a Ford pickup truck. Again, those were scheduled to be done. They've been willing to defer that and, put pressure on fiscal year '22, but was necessary to defer for
And this will
fiscal
be
year
funded,
'21.
the catch basin, which is $215,000, is going to be funded from free cash.
That's correct.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay,
And that really does tie to the discussion you mentioned on Article 17. So yes, as you recall, last year, the May 2019 town meeting It's my understanding that it's typically 700,000 from the town, 700,000 from Chapter 90 monies. And this year, we're doing half of what we usually do, 350,000. Now, part of that, we can say that we can do that and be successful because we're having a town meeting that's so late in the year. So we're really talking about road repair in season that we can do between now and our next town meeting in May. But it is not moving the projects forward. It's not the full commitment that we've done before. So we're trying to get roads done without doing major expense and really leveraging what we had confirmed by the state of our Chapter 90 funds.
Okay. So we can count on the 678,000.
It's been confirmed by the Commonwealth, yes. Yep.
Okay, good. Let's see, how about,
Chris, can I just ask one favor?
please?
I would ask that, I say it all the time, but if Dana and/or Carol hear me say
yeah.
something completely off the mark, which is entirely possible, because I couldn't even tell you what PEG stood for, I would like them to certainly interrupt me and correct the record. I don't want to drone on and be incorrect.
I would also ask that all of you jump in if I'm heading towards stuff that maybe you don't find as important for our voters for this program. Yep. Police and fire, the two departments have only three articles, replacing taser equipment for the police department and an air pack and ambulance for the fire department. And those are Articles 11 for taser and air pack and 13 for the ambulance. So if we look at 11, where is it? I'm almost there. Also funded from free cash, with great funding coming from grants for the air pack. So our voters are going to be asked for both the taser and the air pack to approve $42,299.
So those numbers are going to change, yeah, in the sense that we heard at the Selectmen's meeting on September 14th from Chief LeBlanc that the grant has been confirmed. It's been confirmed for a lower amount, but the net effect is the same. They're buying all of the air packs that were intended. It gets us ahead of the next year's request, which we can now pull from the capital plan.
Great.
It gets them the air packs, and when I say the numbers change, I mean the grant numbers have changed. The town is still looking to fund $20,000 from free cash and just under $7,400 from their fire department operating budget.
Okay.
The great story on this is not only the grant that we received, which is through the great work of Chief LeBlanc and retired Chief Norm Clark, but it's also that for the tasers, we've finalized that purchasing program. This is the third of the 3 years. And for the air packs, we were able to get it done this year rather than this year and next year. So it is a very good story, in my opinion there. I would balance that with what Article 13 really gets to. And Article 13 is, the good news is, Chief LeBlanc has remained committed. As we all know, the need for an ambulance, but that also comes with another deferral, and that is the Quint engine that we've been talking about for almost coming up on a year and a half, if not 2 years now.
Right.
So we are going forward with the ambulance, and that is funded through free cash, but Chief LeBlanc has accepted my request to defer the purchase of the Quint. And again, this is emblematic of our department heads taking the tough hit, but working as a team on behalf of the greater good for the town. So not something that we can easily go without, but certainly a clear case of prioritization.
I'd like to just briefly talk about Harbor Master article for Round Cove. It's Article 21 for our voters on the warrant. Right. So the funding for this is $106,000 and change. And it's to complete the work, as I recall, of an estimated job that's, I'm not sure how to say it, but maybe underestimated, is it?
If I recall this correctly, it's actually through the procurement process of finalizing the repairs and the procurement process identifying additional costs.
Got it.
So this is a supplemental funding request to get the project done. And I apologize, I always get this wrong. Carol, I got to reach out to you for a lifeline. It talks about the receipts reserved as a funding mechanism, and I will defer to Carol on that because I couldn't possibly speak to it articulately.
So there's a Waterways Receipts Reserve Fund. There's actually two. There's Waterways, and then there's the mooring and boat excise Receipts Reserve Fund. So there's two of them. Those are both authorized by Mass General Law. They can only be used if they are appropriated, in which this would be appropriating those funds. So waterway user fees go into a receipts reserve for appropriation for the harbor. 50% of the boat excise and the mooring fees go into a second receipts reserve fund for the harbor, specifically for the harbor. And so the waterways fund would be funding the additional costs for this Round Cove boat ramp. So none of that would be through taxation.
Right. Good news for our voters. I think we could talk about Jamie's. Did we say enough about hers already?
Well, I would ask Jamie if we've said enough about her
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 two
requests.
articles? Okay, all
Yeah.
right, all right. So there are 9 articles under Community Preservation CPC, and they're 29 to 37. And the first one, 29, is basically asking for funding, I guess, moving, no, I'm not saying that right, moving the funding to, so they can spend for the, where am I? I'm sorry, 29. Appropriate sums of money from the fiscal year 2021 estimated annual revenues of the Community Preservation Act Fund. So the first one is to basically give them a budget, it sounds like to me, and in 4 different areas: community housing, open space, historical preservation, and undesignated. So correct me if I got that wrong.
No, I think you're on the right path. My understanding of this is the sort of administrative boilerplate article that the town is actively filling the buckets, as they call it, for each of those areas for that dollar amount. And Carol, I'm sure you can speak much more articulately than I could.
So there was a required set-aside of 10% that would fund community housing reserve, an open space reserve, and then a historic preservation reserve. That is required by CPC or CPA language. In addition to that, there's a new item here this year on this warrant that would fund the operating cost of CPC. So that would be the person that takes the minutes, perhaps any legal advice that they would need to purchase those services, goods that they may need to purchase, which could be office supplies or things of that nature. The remaining balance of that $50,000 would then be reverted at the end of the fiscal year for whatever has not been spent. And so I expect that you will see this customary line in this article come forward and on every warrant, annual town warrant that is brought before the voters. But that's essentially what this article supports.
Their next article, 2930, we're not counting right, funding the land bank debt service. Would you speak to that,
Sure.
Carol?
The land bank debt service is something that the CPA fund took on when they became established. This funds the annual debt obligations for the town of Harwich. Those obligations have been reduced every year as the debt continues to be paid off. The final debt payment for the land bank is fiscal year '24.
Oh, good, okay. And I notice at the bottom, there's there's language, the Finance Committee recommendation. It throws me and maybe other readers that it's in the amount of $53,000 to be transferred. So I don't see it matching up to what the estimated cost is, and it is repeated in another article, right?
And that was a typographical error on
Oh.
behalf of the author. If we go back to the votes of the Finance Committee, we'll see that the correct amount was voted.
Okay, got it, thank you. And then the next Article 31 is 5 items that are under $50,000, and they get to have a separate article. And I don't know if we want to talk about each of them. I'll just say historic areas, property inventory, Chase Library door, community development partnership with the Lower Cape Housing Institute, town-owned conservation land, and I think that's mostly the bogs at, is it? No, the bog, Coldbrook? No, who knows? Chris should just be quiet on this
No,
one right
you've
now.
asked a good question, and I see Dana's back. I'm going to do a lifeline and see if Dana can speak to that one. So that was Article 31, and that's project number 4 that you're asking about, correct?
Town-owned conservation? I'm not sure, well,
Dana, can
Just repeat it one more time,
Yeah.
please.
I thought that the town-owned conservation land, $20,000, might have had something to do with Coldbrook restoration, but I may be out in left field there.
No, I don't think that has to do with Colebrook. It's another project, but I'm not sure enough of the details to go over that, but it's not Colebrook.
We'll figure it out before town meeting. And then the Pleasant Bay community voting.
So Chris, if I could take a step back and just first, and I want to make sure I do this, but David Nixon,
Oh, right.
Chair of Community Preservation Committee, wasn't able to join us today, but I do want to thank and recognize David and the entire committee for the work that they've done, because, again, this is one of those situations I'll talk about because of the way that we're doing this. They did all of their work on these requests months ago, well in advance of what we would be doing for what would have been the May 4th meeting. And I say all that because a mere 4 to 5 days after this town meeting, they're going to get right back into
right.
October 1st, hearing of the presentations for the next year. But in general, what I love about the whole community preservation concept, not just in Harwich but in the Commonwealth, is when the voters look at these articles, it really is a microcosm of the commitment that the town is making when you talk about debt service and getting that, and continue to keep that under control, housing, recreation projects for White House Field and Brooks Park, and one that I think had generated some discussion early on, and that is what we hope to be the new and as vibrant playground housed at Harwich Elementary, to, not that it can replace in spirit, but to follow on from the castle in the clouds.
Right.
And one of the things that strikes me about that, because that was a project that I had assigned to me when I was assistant town administrator, is at the time they were talking about an outdoor classroom. And we all sort of chuckled and thought, well, why would you ever need an outdoor classroom? And it's just another one of those situations where we look at it now and say, boy,
Somebody
it's
had a-
great that we have that in that proposal, because we now understand why we need outdoor classrooms. But like I said, I wanted to thank David and the team for the work that they've done and for the work that they're going to do. They're not going to have any rest whatsoever. But I think, the combination of all these articles gets to the ongoing commitment by the town for these worthy projects.
White House Field lighting, Brooks Park fencing, and the playground, part of them, that, and then rental assistance program. I don't remember that from the past, but it may have been in there before, but it's very timely,
Correct,
during
right.
this,
Yeah, the two items that relate to
Sad
housing,
time.
absolutely.
yeah, sad time. And then maybe we could talk about the revolving fund, which is Article 38. Who wants to go on that one? I
Well,
forget.
I'll take that one because, if there's controversy,
It's all your fault?
I think I caused it,
Okay,
correct,
all right.
exactly. So what you see under Article 38 on page 36 of the warrant it's a level funding of the revolving fund spending limits from the year before, with the notable exception, third from the bottom, on the middle school cultural center. So if you remember the early article we were talking about, I believe it was Article 12, which is facility maintenance, I wrote in the explanation that we are not using free cash for the subsidy because we only had so much free cash to go around. So the only change in this revolving from year over year is that increase to $225,000 for the middle school cultural center revolving fund. And as you can see in the explanation, the reason for that is that, and as you all may know better than I, in years past, the subsidy to help fund the operations of that, which are offset by rental fees of the tenants there, typically had been through the capital plan, and I believe typically through free cash. So in this instance, again, this is what I hope to be one of those occasions where we haven't done it this way before, and we may not do it again in the future. But given that there is a balance that can support it in the Cultural Center revolving fund, I've opted to fund that additional subsidy of $125,000, adding that to the spending limit and accounting for it through the revolving fund fees themselves.
We used to think, or some of us did, that was the cost of the insurance on the middle school.
So I know that the use for the subsidy, if you will, you know, it's more than insurance, and it's more than just keeping the lights on.
Yep,
Because within that, there is inevitably minor repairs and things like that that need to be
yeah,
taken care of, janitorial for sure. You know, just making sure that that center is operational for the tenants so that we can derive the revenue from their rent. And I believe, I know there was a multi-year study, and I want to say that we're, I think, in year 3 of that 5-year study. So we're in the midway point, really.
right.
And so I wanted to ensure that we didn't inadvertently stop that study by not funding it.
Right, great. So let's see where we are. I think we could talk about unpaid bills. Have they ever been this low? Prior years.
That's a good one. I'm going to defer to Carol on that.
$7,500.
I mean,
I got a kick out of, I have to say, $35.79 for office supplies.
So the general laws in the Commonwealth don't allow for us to pay a bill that was pertaining to a prior year. And so, you know, now as it happens, you know, a lot of vendors are emailing invoices, and it could get missed by a department, or it's mailed or lost in the mail, and that's what's happened with these items. So the departments will come to the finance department and say, I have a bill from a prior year, what should I do? And I, you know, explain the process, and that's how they end up here on
Yeah.
in this article, within this article.
It's
And
great.
we hope to keep those to a bare minimum.
Yeah, it's low, I think.
Historically, you would often have department heads that were better at it than others. So sometimes it was the department head would open up a drawer and find an old bill from somewhere. And this has been going on for decades. But you're right, it is lower than we normally see it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Great accounting work, I'd say. Yeah. Do we want to talk a little bit about, planning has some new bylaws, zoning laws, and I think because they have a public hearing coming up?
So 2 of the 3, so there are
Is
3
that right?
zoning bylaw amendments.
Yeah.
The first gets to multifamily, the second one gets to the West Harwich Special District, and the third
Right.
one gets to essential services.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe the multifamily and West Harwich Special District hearings are to occur on Tuesday, September 22nd. I believe the essential services one was the one that was dispatched in July.
Yeah, and that's just to correct terminology, as I recall.
Correct, yep. I think the one that's really going to generate discussion, I know there's some questions around multifamily, but I don't want to reduce it to a simple statement, but I believe, you know, the net effect of that is to make sure that we have, as we've talked about, for housing on Cape Cod, that we have the right language in there to accommodate for, dwelling apartments and all of that. I think the one that we're all going to look to is that special district, and I'm sure as your viewers already know, the work that the planning board had done through our planning director, really through her efforts in working with Cape Cod Commission, to get a special district in place. We've gotten the unanimous support of the Cape Cod Commission every time we've gone before them, so it's now up to the town to finalize that process by saying, we want to ensure that we have the West Harwich Special District, so we have greater span of control over that area, as we've talked about the historic heritage of that area, and making sure that any changes there are done so in a manner that is befitting of that area.
And it's really worth reading to see what is allowed.
Absolutely. Yep.
What might not be. Yep, it's worth it. I think, let's see, I was interested in the changes, the exemptions given to folks under 60. That would be Article 26, a $1,000 tax exemption, who might be disabled, infirmed, or poor. And then also Article 27, which allows tax deferment when you're not paying your taxes.
Right.
Because you're, I guess, counting on paying them either when you sell or pass away.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
So 26 and 27, I think they're valuable. Maybe we don't need to spend a lot of time on them, but if you have something to add to either of those.
Well, that Article 26, if that passes, the town will, through our legislative delegation, seek the special legislation. But as you've said, very early during pandemic, I know that, actually, I'm sorry, even before pandemic, the Board of Assessors were well aware of, what's going on out there in the real world, and the pandemic made it that much more difficult. So these were already in the works, so to speak, for Articles 26 and 27. I believe Article 28 is a renewal of a program that we've always done, but it does get to the Board of Assessors being mindful of how the taxpayers are being impacted generally, and now more so by pandemic, so.
Yeah, they're great, great articles, I think. Am I forgetting anything that about the articles at least? I think we've got most of them. Pine Grove, we have that one. 32, which is that the tree? No, 18 is the tree replacements throughout.
Right.
And the money will come from Perpetual Care Fund. And 32 is Pine Grove, restoring the gravestones and repairing them.
Restoring, repairing, and
Yeah.
preserving. Yep.
Right, and I forget how that's funded. Does
Through
anybody?
CPC.
It is. Thank you. Great. So unless there's something I'm forgetting.
So their interested parties may want to talk about sewer.
Oh, right, exactly. Wastewater.
Excellent point, yep. And the first thing I was going to mention is what you'll notice is a very subtle change, but significant. When you look at the wastewater articles, that has now changed from Board of Selectmen to the newly formed Water Wastewater Commission.
Right, oh, good.
So our incumbents on the Water Commission are now the 3 members of the Water Wastewater.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be joined by 2 individuals that will be added by election in the spring. And so, that transition is because our charter was amended by town meeting a year ago and confirmed by the voters on June 30th, which was our new date for our annual election. And as I think what Carol's alluding to, and I'll be quiet in a moment so you can actually say some stuff, is that we know that we're progressing through the Phase 2. We know at some point, sooner rather than later, we're going to be able to give a turn-on order and all of that. So we're going to see sewer operating far greater than we've seen it now. But I do know, and it was an item, I apologize, that I meant to follow up on, there may be a change to Article 9 Had a conversation with the wastewater superintendent a few weeks ago,
Right?
and this article, the vast majority of this article may not be necessary for fiscal year '21 if the town goes through the steps with the Board of Health to signal that we might be ready on July 1 to give the one-year notice. So we'll take the pressure off of fiscal year '21, and as with many other things, really put the focus back onto fiscal year '22.
Okay, so, because the article, well, the explanation from the Finance Committee indicates that this year sewerage will be going to the treatment plant.
So once the milestones are met, currently the pump station in Chatham, where, the beginning to the end happens of the flow,
Yeah,
that's being constructed as we speak. That's expected to be completed sometime around the month of March or April, it could
Yeah.
be. In addition to that, the town's intermunicipal agreement with the town of Chatham, the town of Harwich's, IMA, as they call it, with the town of Chatham, requires that once that flow begins, a milestone payment is going to be made to the town of Chatham of $1.5 million. So I do anticipate that the town of Harwich will be borrowing long-term debt to support the pump station and that milestone payment that will happen as soon as flow starts. I expect that the sale of those bonds will happen next May or June.
and we voted on that already.
That has already been voted,
Right.
yes.
And Chris, I guess the other point that I would want to bear out is what you will not see in this warrant, and what we do not discuss is the DHY process, and that was intentional. Soon after this town meeting concludes, I know that Chairman Ballantyne has indicated that the board will pick up the DHY discussion. We're able to stall that, if you will, because all three towns are in the same position. None of the towns went forward with their 2020 annual town meeting to finalize the agreement. The three towns have agreed that we'll do that in the spring. And so we'll spend, I know in administration and Board of Selectmen, we'll spend the months between now and then discussing and educating on those projects. But there is nothing in this warrant that specifically gets to the DHY proposal going forward.
Okay.
That'll be coming in, as I've said many times during this discussion today, that'll be coming in fiscal year '22.
Which will be starting soon enough, that
That's right.
process. So I'm hoping we're pretty much wrapping up. Did I forget something, Carol? No? You sure? So I'm looking to you to help our voters know what the logistics are
Sure.
about Saturday, September 26th. Yep.
Well, in line with that, Jamie, not to give you a stage direction, but could you share that screenshot? Sure. So, Chris, as you may know, the selectmen on September 14th, I, along with town engineer Griffin Ryder and health director Megan Eldridge, gave an update on the logistics. So as we tape this on Wednesday, the 16th, there will be further discussions. But I'm hoping to do a broadcast message to the voters on Friday,
Great.
September 18th, to give an outline. And in a moment, what you'll hopefully see is the traffic pattern. But, so again, our town meeting is Saturday, September 26th, with a start time of 10 a.m. And I know that the moderator, so as you all may know, there was a reduction in quorum. And I wanted to explain that very briefly because I know there's some concern about what that really means. The intent of reducing the quorum, which is allowed under special act that's related to COVID-19, is to ensure that we can begin the meeting. It is not going to have any effect whatsoever when Carol had mentioned, and we talked about two-thirds votes or things like that. It's not going to change how many people need to vote on something. But I think I can say on behalf of Moderator Ford, as we've done our several months now of preparation and discussion and walkthrough, and you can see the image up there on the screen at the high school football field, the intent is to be able to start town meeting. The intent is to be able to progress through it expeditiously while still exercising our rights of discussion and debate, and to get it done in a timely manner, because we need Saturday, September 26th to end with an appropriated budget so that we can get fully into fiscal year '21 and then begin the preparations for fiscal year '22. So I wanted your viewers to be aware of what that means for the reduced quorum. I'm actively working on the motions. We're going to finalize those the week of the 21st. And our town council, John Giorgio from KP Law, is working on what is known as a consent motion. So again, to try and expedite, if there are any articles that the town meeting deems to be non-controversial, Moderator Ford could accept a motion of consent to dispatch those so we can really focus on the items where we want to have deep discussion and still get done in about the 2 hours that we're hoping to get it all done. So the public service announcement I would give, and that I'll give on Friday, is that check-in for voters will begin at 9 a.m. We're asking anyone that is driving to the facility to enter in the usual manner that you would if you were dropping a student off. That is the southern entrance by the Little League ball field, and drive all the way around the building to the nearest spot to town meeting. There are almost 400 spaces available, so we should have ample parking there. Of course, we have ample parking available over at the community center for overflow. But we're asking everyone to move in that one-way direction so that the northerly exit heading towards Cranberry Valley Golf Course is going to be exit only.
Got it.
There are bike lock stations throughout, as there always have been. We didn't add that. And I would just advise everybody to dress comfortably. I want to explain that normally, Chris, I would wear a tie for you, but I wanted to demonstrate the manner in which I will be dressing, because the order of the day is comfort.
Yeah.
And so we're encouraging folks to dress comfortably, dress seasonably, so bring something warm in case it does get cool. We recommend flat-heeled shoes because you are going to be walking on the field, and that's a recipe for disaster if you have any length of a heel on. We're asking folks to bring their own reusable water bottle. We will not have refreshments or water available. And we're recommending the use of hats versus sunshades because everyone's going to be on a level field, and we don't want anyone obstructing anyone's view. And of course, throughout it all, mask coverings are mandatory. And that was an order of the Board of Health that the selectmen had asked for and agreed to. And we're doing this outside because we have to, and we want to remain vigilant and mindful of the reason that we are outside, and that is COVID-19 coronavirus. So we're asking everybody to really go in that effort. And then last but not least, we've heard about some errors that are in there, and I also know I totally blew it, where there was a vote of town meeting, I believe, in May of 2019, where the voters would be looking for the roll call of articles of both the recommendations of Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen. So because we're not presenting or projecting anything because of sunlight, there will be a handout of all of the motions that we will have at that time,
Yep.
as well as an errata sheet explaining any of the corrections that were in the warrant, and the roll call information. And I know Carol's going to provide a few sheets of very useful financial information, so the voters will have that. So when they check in, we'll have members of the CERT team helping us as they have with the pop-up clinics that we had for COVID-19 throughout the summer. They're fantastic, they're very well-versed, and they're going to help us with flow. And we'd ask everybody, we will have the warrants available with the handouts, and just come early, come prepared, and come ready to discuss.
Right. And there's a separate section for those non-voters, I understand.
That's
from-
correct. The bleachers are reserved for non-voters and staff who are not voters.
Yeah.
So that staff will have easy access to the field. And on the rare exception that somebody has as an exemption to be maskless, we have a separate section for them as well on the field.
And we don't have to bring our own chairs.
That's correct. The chairs are provided. Moderator, I love his enthusiasm and his optimism. He directed me to have staff ensure that we had at least 470 seats available. So even though it's only going to take 100 voters present to start the meeting, we're expecting a full crowd and a robust discussion.
I agree.
And I, for one, am personally thrilled that we're finally reaching this milestone.
Oh, my gosh. It's been a hard road to hoe.
Absolutely.
Thank you both, very nice. And to Dana, off camping somewhere, thank you to Jamie, as usual. Perfect arrangements here. Thank you.
Can I just add that, we'll be presenting a total of X amount of articles, which is lower than what we normally have. The total dollar values will be lower. all the operating budgets add up to a lower amount than what was presented last year. The capital plan is lower. When you talked earlier about the efforts of the department heads to come through and the Board of Selectmen to come through on this warrant and presentation, it is less than last year and less than the few previous years in terms of what being presented to the voters this year. And I think that's an important thing to just stress, that we heard everything that's being said. We're reduced, and we're coming forward with a very reasonable set of requests.
Thank you, Dana. Wrapping up.
Thank you.
Yep, come to town meeting.